The 17th of January 1917. 9:14 inches the morning. Room 40. Admiralty Building, London. Nigel de Grey had not slept. The gas lamps had been burning all night. Cipher sheets covered every inch of his desk, columns of numbers, letters, fragments of intercepted code that meant nothing to anyone outside these walls. Outside, London was frozen. The Thames carried ice. The war had been grinding for 2.5 years. De Grey was a codebreaker. That was his war. Not trenches, not mud. Pages of numbers, and the silence of a room where no one spoke unless they had found something. He had found something. He read the decoded message again. And then again. His hands were steady. His face was not. What he was holding was not a military order. It was not a troop movement or a naval position. It was a proposal written by Germany's foreign secretary, addressed to the President of Mexico, offering Mexico the states of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona in exchange for invading the United States of America. De Grey stood up. He walked to the door. He needed to find his superior, immediately. Because what he was holding in his hands was not just intelligence. It was the document that would end American neutrality. It was the telegram that would bring 2 million soldiers across the Atlantic. It was the message that Germany never believed anyone would read. They were wrong. This is the story of a single encrypted telegram, 17 lines of text, and how its interception changed the course of the First World War. It is also the story of one of the greatest intelligence failures in military history, and of a man so arrogant he confessed to the forgery even after he was caught. New decisions, new leaders, new catastrophes. Subscribe and you won't miss a single one. By January 1917, Germany was in a position that its generals had always feared and its strategists had always warned against. The war on 2 fronts was real. It was consuming the country. In the West, the trenches had not moved meaningfully in 2 years. The Somme had cost Germany over 400,000 casualties. Verdun had bled the French army to near collapse, but it had bled the German army too. The front line in France was a scar across the continent, and neither side could move it. In the East, the situation had improved. Russia was faltering. The Tsar's armies were disintegrating from the inside: desertion, starvation, revolution. Germany had reason to believe the Eastern Front might resolve itself before the year was over. But there was a problem that made every military calculation secondary: Britain's naval blockade. Since 1914, the Royal Navy had maintained a stranglehold on German sea lanes. Food imports had collapsed. By 1917, Germany's civilian population was surviving on turnips. Industrial output was slowing as raw materials dried up. The blockade was not winning the war in a single dramatic moment. It was winning it slowly, like a hand tightening around a throat. Germany had one weapon that could theoretically break the blockade: its submarine fleet. The U-boats had proven lethal. They could sink merchant ships faster than Britain could replace them. If Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare targeting every vessel in British waters, neutral or otherwise, the calculation of German naval command was that Britain could be starved into submission within 6 months. There was one problem with this calculation. One enormous, unavoidable problem: the United States of America. America had been neutral since 1914. President Woodrow Wilson had won re-election in November 1916 on a slogan that resonated across a war-weary country: "He kept us out of the war." Americans did not want to send their sons to die in European trenches for European disputes they did not fully understand and had not started. But American neutrality had a commercial dimension that Germany could not ignore. The United States was supplying the Allies. American factories were producing shells, rifles, uniforms, and food. American banks were financing British and French war bonds. American ships were crossing the Atlantic, and some of those ships were being sunk by German submarines. When the Lusitania went down in 1915 with 1,198 people aboard, including 128 Americans, Wilson had come closer to declaring war than Germany's leadership had anticipated. Germany had backed down. It had placed limits on submarine warfare to avoid provoking American entry. But by late 1916, that calculation was changing. Admiral Henning von Holtzendorff, chief of the German naval staff, presented Kaiser Wilhelm II with a memorandum on the 22nd of December 1916. It was precise, methodical, and catastrophically wrong in one specific assumption. Holtzendorff's argument was this: if Germany sank 600,000 tons of Allied shipping per month, Britain would exhaust its food and material reserves within 5 months. Britain would be forced to negotiate. The war would end on German terms before the American industrial machine could be brought to bear. Yes, he acknowledged unrestricted submarine warfare would almost certainly provoke the United States into declaring war. But it would not matter, Holtzendorff argued. America was not ready. It would take 18 months. perhaps 2 years, for the United States to raise, train, equip, and transport an army capable of affecting the European battlefield. By then, Britain would already have surrendered. Germany would win before America could arrive. It was a precise, methodical, and catastrophically wrong calculation. Because Holtzendorff's memo had a hidden flaw. It assumed that America's contribution to the war would be delayed, gradual, and logistically compromised. It did not account for the psychological effect of American entry. It did not account for the credit markets. It did not account for what one American general named John Pershing would be capable of organizing in 12 months. And it did not account for a foreign secretary named Arthur Zimmermann, who had decided to play a side game that would make everything worse. Arthur Zimmermann was appointed Germany's foreign secretary in November 1916. He was 51 years old, energetic, and confident in ways that the situation did not entirely justify. Zimmermann shared Holtzendorff's analysis about the United States. America would enter the war if Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. That was, at this point, simply accepted. The question was not whether it was when, and whether it would matter. Zimmermann's contribution to German strategy was this: if America was going to enter the war anyway, Germany should attempt to distract it. Keep America busy at home. Force Washington to look south rather than east. Prevent the American military from focusing entirely on Europe. His instrument was Mexico. Mexico in 1917 was not a stable country. The Mexican Revolution had been grinding for nearly a decade. President Venustiano Carranza was leading a government that was internationally recognized but domestically contested. General Pancho Villa had raided American territory the previous year, crossing into New Mexico, killing civilians, and the United States Army had spent much of 1,916 chasing Villa across northern Mexico without catching him. Relations between Washington and Mexico City were tense, resentful, and distrustful in exactly the ways that Zimmermann believed he could exploit. His proposal was simple. Germany would offer Mexico a military alliance. If the United States entered the war against Germany, Mexico would attack the United States from the south. In exchange for this alliance and for Mexico's military action, Germany would finance the Mexican war effort and, upon Germany's victory, support Mexico's territorial claim to Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona territories that Mexico had lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War of 1846. Zimmermann encoded this proposal in a diplomatic cipher and transmitted it on the 16th of January 1917 through the German ambassador in Washington to the German minister in Mexico City, Heinrich von Eckart. He transmitted it through the American diplomatic cable. This detail deserves a pause. Germany, attempting to arrange a military alliance against the United States, transmitted the telegram through American infrastructure. Wilson had generously allowed Germany to use American diplomatic cables for peace negotiations. Zimmermann used that access to send a message proposing that Mexico invade American soil. The arrogance embedded in that decision is almost difficult to process. But there was a second problem with Zimmermann's plan, a problem he did not know about. The British had been reading German diplomatic traffic since 1914. Room 40 was the operational heart of British naval intelligence. Named simply for its location in the Admiralty building, it was staffed by linguists, classicists, mathematicians, and puzzle solvers, men who had been recruited precisely because they thought differently. In the first months of the war, a British naval vessel had dragged a German codebook from the body of a drowned German signalman in the North Sea. A second codebook had been retrieved from a captured German vessel in the Baltic. A third had been recovered from a wrecked German cruiser. With these keys, Room 40 had been decrypting German naval and diplomatic communications with remarkable consistency since 1914. When Zimmermann's telegram arrived on the 17th of January 1917, it was flagged and routed to de Grey and his colleague, Reverend William Montgomery. The telegram used one of Germany's most complex diplomatic ciphers, code 0075. It took de Grey and Montgomery hours to work through it. Some sections remained unclear, but the core of the message was legible. And the core of the message was extraordinary. De Grey brought it to his superior, Admiral William Hall, known throughout British intelligence as Blinker Hall, for the involuntary tick in his eye. Hall read the telegram. He sat back in his chair. And then he faced a problem that was more complex than anything de Grey had anticipated. Britain could not simply hand the telegram to the United States, because doing so would immediately reveal that Britain was reading German diplomatic traffic and Germany would change its ciphers. The intelligence source that had been feeding Room 40 for 3 years would be destroyed. Every future intercept would be lost. Hall had to find a way to use the telegram without revealing how it had been obtained. He had to make Germany think the leak had come from somewhere else. It would take 5 weeks. On the 1st of February 1917, Germany officially announced the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. 2 days later, the United States severed diplomatic relations with Germany. Wilson was not yet at war. He was still searching for a way to remain neutral. He had spent 3 years building an identity as a peace president. He genuinely believed that American mediation could end the conflict. He was not a man who moved quickly toward violence. Then, on February 19, Blinker Hall moved. Hall had obtained a copy of the telegram through Mexico City, where the message had been retransmitted in an older, less sophisticated cipher, making it easier to decode without revealing Room 40's capabilities. He presented it to the American embassy in London. The ambassador, Walter Hines Page, was stunned. He forwarded it immediately to Washington. On February 24, Page delivered the decoded telegram to Secretary of State Robert Lansing. Lansing brought it to Wilson. Wilson read it twice. He asked if it was genuine. He was told it was. Wilson, who had spent years holding America back from the war, who had won re-election on the promise of peace, who had personally drafted proposals for a negotiated settlement, stared at a document that told him Germany was arranging for Mexico to invade Texas. His response was not immediate fury. It was something colder. He authorized the telegram's publication. On the 1st of March 1917, the Associated Press released the Zimmermann telegram to the American press. The reaction was not subtle. American public opinion shifted with a speed that had no precedent in the country's political history. The isolationist argument that the war was a European affair, a dispute between empires that had nothing to do with ordinary Americans, collapsed almost overnight. Germany was not merely sinking ships in the Atlantic. Germany had written a letter to Mexico, suggesting that American states be handed over as a reward for attacking American territory. In Texas, the reaction was particularly vivid. The state that Germany had offered to Mexico read the telegram and reacted with the particular fury of a people told they had been treated as a commodity. Newspapers across the South and Midwest, which had been the stronghold of isolationist sentiment, turned almost uniformly against Germany within days. Zimmermann, to the astonishment of nearly everyone involved, chose this moment to confirm that the telegram was genuine. On the 3rd of March 1917, he stood before the German Reichstag and admitted it. He did not deny authorship. He did not claim the telegram was a forgery, a fabrication, or a British deception, the position that might at least have sown doubt. He confirmed it was real, and attempted to justify it as a defensive measure. His candor, while perhaps personally admirable in isolation, was strategically catastrophic. It removed the last argument available to American isolationists, who had been quietly hoping the telegram was a British propaganda fabrication. It was not. The German Foreign Secretary had said so himself. On the 2nd of April 1917, Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. 4 days later, Congress agreed. The United States was now at war. By the autumn of 1917, the first American soldiers were arriving in France. By the spring of 1918, they were arriving at a rate of 10,000 per day. By the summer of 1918, there were over 1 million American soldiers on the Western Front, fit, fed, rested, and supplied by the largest industrial economy on Earth. Holtzendorff's calculation that America could not matter before Britain collapsed was wrong by approximately 12 months. Britain did not collapse. America arrived. And the arithmetic of the war changed completely. The damage extended in multiple directions simultaneously. Holtzendorff's promise of victory within 6 months through unrestricted submarine warfare failed to materialize. British shipbuilding accelerated. The convoy system grouping merchant vessels together under naval escort reduced submarine effectiveness dramatically. The 600,000 tons per month that Holtzendorff had promised was met briefly, then fell short as British anti-submarine tactics improved. Britain did not surrender. It adapted. Zimmermann's plan to distract America with Mexico produced the opposite of its intended effect. Rather than keeping the United States focused on its southern border, the telegram united American public opinion against Germany with an efficiency that years of Allied propaganda had failed to achieve. The very act of attempting to divert America accelerated America's decision to commit fully to Europe. Mexico, for its part, declined the offer. President Carranza recognized immediately that accepting Germany's proposal would be suicidal. Mexico could not fight the United States. It had no navy. Its army was already fragmented by years of civil war. The idea that Mexico could reconquer Texas was not strategy, it was fantasy dressed in diplomatic language. Carranza quietly ignored the German proposal. Zimmermann was removed from office in August 1917. His tenure as Foreign Secretary had lasted less than a year. He returned to relative obscurity, living until 1940, long enough to see Germany's second attempt at European dominance end in another catastrophic defeat. Admiral Holtzendorff retired in 1918 as Germany's military situation became irretrievable. His career had ended in the precise failure he had promised was impossible. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated in November 1918 as German cities descended into revolution and his armies dissolved on the Western Front. The plan that was supposed to win the war before America could arrive had instead accelerated America's arrival and guaranteed Germany's defeat. Nigel de Grey, the man who first decoded the Zimmermann telegram in Room 40, continued working in British intelligence. In the Second World War, he would work at Bletchley Park, the successor institution to Room 40, helping to crack the German Enigma cipher. His work in 1917, and again in the 1940s, represented two of the most consequential acts of cryptanalysis in the history of warfare. Blinker Hall's handling of the telegram's release became a case study in intelligence tradecraft, how to use a secret without revealing its source. His solution of obtaining a copy through Mexico City's less sophisticated retransmission preserved Room 40's capabilities for the remainder of the war. The telegram itself became an artifact. The original decoded text, with its handwritten annotations, is held today in the archives of the British National Archives at Kew. Researchers can view it. Scholars have studied every word. The 17 lines that Zimmermann wrote in code, and that de Grey decoded in the early hours of the 17th of January 1917, remain one of the most consequential documents in the history of American foreign policy. The entry of the United States into the First World War did not immediately turn the tide. 1917 was still a brutal year. The French army mutinied. The British bled at Passchendaele. Russia collapsed into revolution and eventually withdrew from the war, freeing 1 million German soldiers for transfer to the Western Front. But the knowledge that American reinforcements were coming and arriving faster than Germany had believed possible shaped every calculation of 1918. It shaped the desperation of Germany's spring offensives, launched in March 1918 inches. A last attempt to achieve victory before American strength became overwhelming. It shaped the Allied ability to absorb those offensives, knowing that more men were coming. And it shaped the final Allied counteroffensives of August, September, and October 1918, which broke the German army before American weight alone could do it. Germany requested an armistice on the 11th of November 1918. The war that Germany had designed to be won by submarines ended with 2 million American soldiers standing on French soil. There is a specific kind of failure embedded in the Zimmermann story that does not belong only to 1917. It is the failure of a mind that sees only the pieces it has already decided matter. Zimmermann looked at Mexico and saw leverage. He looked at America and saw delay. He looked at his cipher and saw security. He did not look at the men in Room 40. He did not consider that his communication infrastructure was already compromised. He did not ask whether Mexico, a country recovering from a decade of civil war, would view his proposal as an opportunity or a suicide note. He did not imagine failure. Holtzendorff looked at his tonnage calculations and saw mathematics. He saw merchant shipping figures, food import data, and a 6-month timeline that, on paper, was logical. He did not look at what happens when a democracy is told that its neutrality has been used against it. He did not calculate the emotional mathematics of the Zimmermann telegram's publication, The Fury of Americans in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, who discovered they had been traded like land grants in a diplomatic poker game. He did not factor in that democracies can move faster than empires when they are angry enough. The First World War is full of decisions made by men who believed they had accounted for everything. Schlieffen, who mapped a war but could not account for the Belgian army's resistance. Haig, who believed the artillery had destroyed what the infantry would find intact. Conrad, who launched offensives with soldiers who had no ammunition. Falkenhayn, who believed he could bleed France to death at Verdun without bleeding Germany too. Each of them saw the board as they wished it to be, not as it was. Zimmermann sent a telegram through American infrastructure, in a code Britain had already partially broken, to a country that could not fulfill the promise, about a war he could not win. And when the telegram was published, he confirmed it was real. There is a kind of courage in that confession, a refusal to hide behind a lie. But there is also something almost bewildering about it. The admission removed the last ambiguity. It closed the last door. Leadership, at its best, is the ability to see clearly when clarity is the most unwelcome thing in the room. To look at a plan and ask not whether it is logical, but whether the assumptions underneath the logic are solid. To ask what happens if the other side reads the memo. To ask what happens if the cipher is not as secure as believed. To ask whether the country you are counting on to be your ally is actually capable of the role you have assigned it. Zimmermann did not ask those questions. He sent the telegram. And Nigel de Grey, exhausted, working by lamplight in a room that history has largely forgotten, read every word. That is how wars are sometimes decided, not in the moment when the guns fire, but in the moment before, when a tired man in a quiet room reads a message that was never meant for him. If this story resonated with you, if you want to understand not just what happened in the First World War, but but why the people in charge made the choices they made, and what those choices cost. Then subscribe to this channel. Every 2 days, a new decision. A new leader, standing at a moment that changed history. The orders, the warnings, the calculations, and the catastrophic gaps between what was planned and what actually happened. The Great War decisions. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who thinks they know how the First World War ended. They might not know about the 17 lines that started it all.